Hello, Lit in Comp 1. This is an introduction to the Unit 1 Night Final Analysis over a memoir. This is an 80-point paper that's going to kind of conclude our first unit together. It's what I'm going to call a short paper. It's about a 1 page in length, and you'll see examples of it today. You'll see some resources. So I'd like you to work off of the Google Classroom live stream that has the slideshow and the handouts attached. So up here is the directions. So the goal is for you guys to consider memoir writing. What is it? And I want you to pick it apart in Ellie's novel. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick apart the content and craft of his work. You're going to look at themes especially. And I want you to discuss why. Why did he do the things that he did? Because it's an analysis short paper, you're going to focus on one key scene from the book overall. It's going to be a response that is author-focused, so no I statements. You're going to talk about Weissel and his work and what he does. You will have to use evidence, and you'll have to talk about his writing or craft discussion points or his craft elements. And lastly, I want the paper to add to the conversation, and what I mean by that is you're interpreting and thinking out this choice of the scene that you picked. You're not just going to summarize. I've read the book multiple times, so I don't need a full-fledged summary. What I want is I want to see what you thought and what your biggest takeaways are from the novel to conclude Unit 1. So what we're going to do is, I printed it as a packet, but if you are working digitally, right here is a mentor text that I used for my sample paper. So I would ask that you read this. This is a memoir. It's from a book called I Am Malala. And it's written by Malala, who is a young girl who basically is an advocate and an activist for education, especially for young girls. She is from Pakistan. She was unfortunately a victim of a Taliban execution. It failed. She was shot in the head, but she survived. And ever since then, and even before she was shot, she was basically going around and speaking at events about how children need to be educated and how girls and young women also need to have access to education. So she's a very powerful young woman. She did win the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's one of the youngest people to win it. And I think some of her discussion mirrors some of the experiences of Ellie, even though she's in a different time period, in a different religion, and a different circumstance. So I want you to read this passage and kind of consider, what is she doing for memoir? I want you to think about what stands out to you the most. You know, it's a short piece, but zoom in even further about what do you notice. I want you to think about what craft elements she uses and how she uses them, and then what seems to be her biggest theme or her biggest argument in the passage. These three skills are going to be the skills that I'm going to look at in your guys' paper. So that's the first thing you'll want to do. That's the first reference. The second thing you'll want to do is you'll look at my sample paper, which is right here. So I want you to read this and consider, how do I organize it? Right now, you can even just look at it visually. What do you notice? Hopefully you can see it's got a title. It's got little like subheaders. It uses italics. There's bolding, and you can see it is 1 page. It has 2 big talking points. These are my 2 talking points. It's got an intro and it's got a conclusion. So it's about a 4-paragraph response. I want you to read this and consider, what did I do that's successful? How is it good writing? How is it capturing the different skill set that I'm asking? And I'll go over that again in the slideshow. And then what will happen is you can look at how I annotate and how I organize with this graphic organizer, and that might help you start your own paper. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow and kind of once again talk out what the paper is supposed to do. We looked at progress reports because we have a cutoff day for missing night work. That is Monday the 7th. And if you get back to class, I'll pass back your paperwork and stuff like that. So you need to be able to pick a scene. You're picking any scene you want from night. A lot of discussion today was about chapter 2 in Mrs. S. A lot of kids, the scene where the cattle trains are packed with all the men after the death march and how they fight over a crust of bread. That was a pretty powerful scene for many students. If I were to pick a scene that stood out to me, it would be the scene, basically how he concludes it with the image of him as a corpse in a mirror. I then want you to think about what are the memoir elements he uses, what craft devices. And I talked a lot about this in class. Craft doesn't have to be a fancy vocab word. Like, you don't have to say it is a foreshadow, or it's polysyndeton, or it's an onomatopoeia. You could just say, like, it's a narrative shift, or he uses short paragraphs, or you can see his tone is this. Craft is just how he writes it and how he actually utilizes language or structure or grammar devices to help promote his themes. And then finally, you do need to be able to pick apart a theme and kind of talk about his arguments overall. Father-son relationships was a popular conversation point in class today. Dehumanization is also a pretty powerful argument on Weissel's part. And the packet is going to be in the classroom. But remember, this is memoir analysis. You guys will write your own memoir closer to Unit 2. This is just looking at a memoir example. And the second set of skills here is I want you to be able to close read. So close reading helps students read text that's above their comfort level. It's a critical skill in college. You have to go back and reread text in college. It's just how you write papers. It's how you develop your arguments for class discussion. And it's hard for kids to do because it takes time and energy to go back and reread what you've already done. And so that is something you will want to do, just like I did here. So when you pick out your scene, you need to go back to the scene in your paper copy of your book. I would rip it apart, and you need to reread it. Now that you know what I'm looking for scene choice, craft, and theme. I want you to annotate that according to, what you're getting from there. So if you notice, I've annotated some things, and then I just kind of reread the passage with a fresh set of eyes, with a fresh point of view, because I know I have to write a paper, and I'm trying to decide what are going to be my talking points, what seems to be the biggest takeaways. And then what happens is I basically annotated the 2 takeaways, or the 2 big ideas that I got from this close chunk, or this key scene. And the first thing I took away is Malala starts off with something very relatable. She talks about how she wants to be tall. And it doesn't matter if you're a Middle Eastern girl or not. Everybody has wanted something more in their life. I personally have also wanted to be taller. I've also wished my hair was not as curly. So I thought that that was really interesting, and I zoomed in even further, and basically I circled my favorite part, and that became my first talking point in my paper, which is right here. And then my second, most focal point thing was this narration down here about how the woman and her husband, if he's dead or not dead, and if that allows her to remarry. We talked about this in class because this might seem foreign to us, like, oh, why would she want her husband dead? She must not love him. But the reality is, women need a husband to provide them income, to provide the household, the estate, the property. And in this society, if you don't have a male as a husband or a male relative that takes care of you, you're basically destitute. And so it causes a lot of problems because this society is very patriarchal, like male-driven or male-focused. So I kind of picked out some ideas, and we'll talk more about this throughout the week, but I annotated this again, and then I jumped into my graphic organizer. So I picked my scene. Let's say my scene is Moish the Beetle. So in chapter 1, meeting Moish and finding out how he's a mentor and how he basically showcases Ellie's very devout religion at the start of the novel. I reread it and I annotated it, and then maybe I focus in on some key things, which is basically the discussion about his eyes. I think they're tears like wax. That was probably one of the more powerful descriptions I got. And then also how nobody believes him, and he ends up running away after he tries to warn everybody. So then what I'm going to do is go to this organizer, and I'm going to start to plan out my intro. I'm going to plan out my first talking point, which is basically I'm going to talk about how he's a religious mentor, eyes like wax. He's basically Ellie's only hope, I think, other than his father. And then the second talking point I'm going to mention is basically how people ignore him, and they kind of miss the first big warning sign of what is to come. And I'll fill out this according to those different prompts. And then I'll consider some things for my closing, and I'll think about word choice and evidence and things like that, and I'm going to start to plot out and plan my paper. So hopefully this gets you started. So today we just talked about the sample, we talked about these 3 skills, we talked about how you have to close read and go back into the text, revisit it, re-annotate for content, craft, and theme analysis. And this is the example, so make sure you look at the example. You can watch her video because she is very inspiring. And then we'll talk more about the rubric on Wednesday. We'll talk more about the organizer on Wednesday and also how you can close read. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about quote integration. A lot of kids talked about that in the sample. So if you look at the actual sample paper, which I got too many tabs, you can see I kind of integrated the quotes in short little moments or short little bursts of quotations. We're going to talk about that as well. So I hope that helps you start thinking about the paper. Like I said, we still have 4 days to work on it. Or 3 days rather, but I want you to start actively thinking about it and coming up with a plan. All right, good luck.